Today we're doing part 2 of Steve and Miranda's relationship in Sex and the City, the original series that aired on HBO back in the day in the 90s, because they just destroyed this relationship so badly in And Just Like That, and I kind of wanted to look back and find out what happened. Like, did we miss something? Did we not understand what we saw? And so far, I've done part 1 already, and you can go back and watch that. But so far, I think I'm discovering that Miranda never deserved Steve in the first place. And if anything, I'm starting to believe that And Just Like That should have explored how Steve finds happiness, not Miranda, because Miranda had her chance, and she had plenty of chances with Steve. So let's get into this. I'm Megan Fox. I write with pjmedia.com. Every day I write columns about politics and stuff, and then I come here to YouTube and I have fun about pop culture and TV shows and stuff that I am interested in. So let's get to it, shall we? So we left off where Miranda and Steve are together, but they're having problems with schedules. The scheduling is a problem. Steve is always trying to keep Miranda in bed longer in the morning, and she's got to get up, go to work or go do her laundry or whatever, go to spinning class. And she's always complaining that because he's a bartender and he's up very, very late, their schedules are off and she doesn't have time in the morning and he's too tired at night. And so she's always complaining about this to her friends. Now, I would like to point out that back in season 1, Miranda had this whole series of episodes where she did not have a boyfriend or anyone to date, and she was complaining about it constantly, about how she had not been with anyone in 3 whole months and how awful that was. Now she has a boyfriend who wants to have her around all the time, and that's not good enough either. Miranda is just a bitch. I'm sorry, but this character is never happy, never contented, and it's exhausting after a while. So she's always complaining to the girls about the situation with Steve. Now, I wanted to point out this scenario. In the scene, they were in a bingo night. They were at drag queen bingo. Just to point out that the criticisms against Sex and the City always was that it wasn't diverse enough. This entire scene takes place with like several different drag queens that are hosting this event, and the girls are having a wonderful time, and there are clearly people there, LGBT. This is clearly like an LGBT night somewhere, and this kind of stuff was in the original show. And this is the part where Brad comes up to Samantha and he's dressed as her. He's taken on her persona in his drag costume, and it was funny. But the idea that there was never any LGBT representation or whatever in the show is just a lie, and there's proof. Okay, so Miranda decides that when Steve comes home from the bar, she's definitely going to have their time together, and she's going to, she's waiting for him to come home to make sure that they can have their romantic time before morning when she has to go to work. But Steve's like, oh, this is great, terrific. And she goes, I don't know what she's doing, but she goes into the bathroom or whatever to brush her teeth. And by the time she comes out, he's sleeping. So, of course, she gets pissed off. And here comes bitch Miranda back, and she tells him he has to leave. He just got done with like his 12-hour shift or whatever. And he has to leave her house because she doesn't want him there in the morning. I found this to be so awful. Awful. Like, couldn't you have just said, all right, fine, just go to sleep. You're tired, but I have to get up at whatever time, and that's what time I'm getting up. But no, she makes him go back out into the cold or whatever and go home. Who knows how long it took him to get home? He was already asleep and already comfortable. Like, she's just a jerk. And he tells her, when you get some time, when you can pencil me in, why don't you let me know? So a few days go by. She doesn't, they're not talking. They're not really together. And it's like 2 a.m. and she's waiting. She's up. She can't sleep. And he calls. And this is a really sweet scene. And I know a lot of you have mentioned it, that like, this is just one of the greatest scenes. He calls her from a payphone. And how much, by the way, do I love the fact that there were still payphones in this series. That's how long ago this series was. It's such a time capsule in so many ways. I mean, try to find a payphone now. I dare you. You can't. which is terrible. They should still exist because some people don't have phones. Or what if your phone runs out of batteries? I miss the payphone. Anyway, he calls her to tell her he just wants her to look up and see the blue moon because it's rare and he didn't want her to miss it. Oh, I just love this. It's so romantic and so sweet. And it's so indicative of Steve. You know, he is such a, he's a guy who's so thoughtful. He's the opposite of Miranda. Miranda never thinks about anybody but herself. Steve always thinks about Miranda. So in the next couple of episodes, or I'm kind of going quickly through like season 2 and part of season 3 here. So this is going to span several episodes. In this episode, Miranda has said, you know, she knows that Steve is of a lower class than her. He makes less money than her. Although I don't know how much less money. Bartenders make good money in New York. I mean, they do make it look like he lives really cheap. He has this really cheap apartment and he doesn't make a lot of money. So she agrees to let him buy her lunches and dinners at places she knows he can afford. So like they go to cheap pizza joints, and that's sweet. That's good of her to be thinking of him. That's one of the first times we see Miranda actually being thoughtful of Steve and his situation. And you know, so she's being delightful, which is nice for once because Miranda is rarely nice to him. He takes her to his apartment and she's pretty judgy about it, although she tries to be nice. She's not saying anything to him, but he knows that he knows that it's cheap. And he even tells her like it's awful. She sees the suit so she's invited him to this fancy thing at her firm. And he needs a suit. And he told her, I have one, but it's corduroy. And she's like, corduroy? And he's like, what's wrong with corduroy? She says, I don't have enough time to tell you what's wrong with corduroy. And I guess in a New York City way, that's true. I mean, but there are worse things, okay, than a corduroy jacket. I mean, all right, it's not the greatest look, but, you know, it is a suit coat, so it could work if that's all he had. But instead, she decides that she's going to take him shopping for a suit. Now, Diego Knows pointed this out when he did his review of this episode, and he's absolutely right. Like when you tell someone, I'm taking you shopping for a suit, you work out who's going to pay for that suit before you get to the store and before you start trying stuff on. So the idea here that he didn't know that Miranda was going to buy him this suit, and then he ends up buying it himself, which he can't afford because it's over $1,000. And it's just unrealistic. And I realized they had to write it like this for the storyline, but it just makes you suspend reality because of course you would have had the conversation on the way to this store before you even decided to go to this store. Like, I will buy you a suit. Like, if that's what Miranda wanted, that she wanted him to wear something that he didn't have, then she should buy it for him. And there's nothing wrong with that. If he wants, if a man wanted to buy me a dress to take me somewhere fancy because I didn't have one, believe me, I'd be saying, sure. Like, who says no to that? And Steve just has a pride issue here that I don't really think is in his character. And so I think they kind of went off the script, like went off his character on this because he knows she makes more money. She's offering with all generosity to buy this thing for him, and like he just can't do it. And he tells her, it makes me compare you to my mother, and that's weird for me. I don't want to feel like you're my mother. But if that's the case, then he's choosing the wrong woman. If that's hard for him, a woman who makes more money, then he shouldn't be dating Miranda. But I just think it's kind of out of character. I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that was out of character? Because I don't see why he didn't just let her buy the suit. And I think the only reason why they did this was for the story. Okay, so then he shows up to take her to the event. She's dressed up. She looks very nice. I love her hair like this, by the way. I like that very short pixie on her with the bright red hair. I think it looks really good on her. But he comes to get her and he's not dressed. He's wearing a t-shirt. And he tells her, it made me feel bad about myself that I couldn't buy the suit and I couldn't afford it, so I took it back. And I shouldn't buy things that I can't afford, which is absolutely great. Dave Ramsey would approve. Don't buy things that you can't afford. Don't put stuff on credit cards that you can't pay off. So that shows that Steve has good character. And so he breaks up with her. He actually breaks up with her. He says, this isn't working for him, and there will always be things out of his reach and not out of hers, and she tries to talk him out of it. She says, "So I'm being punished for being successful?" And he said, "That's not how I mean it." But it does seem that that's how he means it, and it does seem that that's the reason they broke up, is because he feels uncomfortable around her and her class of people. So she goes to the event, and she's realizing that there are worse things than a corduroy jacket. And I think that that's interesting and good for her to realize that. Like, she shouldn't have made a big deal about the fact that the only thing he had to wear was corduroy. Maybe she should have let Steve be Steve. Or maybe they shouldn't have gone to this thing, you know? Like, if you were so worried about the jacket, you like someone for who they are, not for what they wear. And trying to change people is not a good idea. So she's missing him. But instead of going to talk to him about it and telling him that she's sorry and trying to work it out, no, she doesn't do that. Miranda just starts dating random guys. So she finds out that she has a lazy ovary, which freaks her out and makes her decide that she's going to go and start dating just randos because she's feeling desperate or something. I don't know. But this guy's got terrible hair plugs, and he ends up rejecting her because of the lazy ovary, which, I think is pretty nuts. I don't think this guy has a whole lot of options, so I'm not sure that he would have done that. But so then she starts just dating random guys. So then we have this guy she meets at a bookseller, and he turns out to be, and he's so funny. I don't know his name, but he's the one who was in Arrested Development. He played Job, and he's so funny. Let me see if I can find his name. What is his name? Will Arnett, of course, the great Will Arnett. He is so funny. And anyway, he actually lasts more than one. I think he lasts more than one episode. A lot of these guys don't, but he ends up being the guy who likes to take risks in public, if you know what I mean. And it all ends up ending with him, with his parents walking in, and he planned that on purpose. So she's dating freaks. She's out there dating freaks again. No one she's dating is anywhere near as nice or as, nice as Steve. Then she has this weird thing with the guy across the alley who she thinks is cruising on her, but it turns out that he wasn't. So she has this whole cringy flirtation with him across the alley that gets just stupid. And she runs into him in the grocery store, and he's like, "Oh, yeah." And she tries to introduce herself, and he has no idea who she is because he's been cruising the guy who lives in the apartment either above or below her. I don't remember. And he's really rude to her. And she just runs away miserable. Then she starts dating this guy who's a lawyer, and you think, well, okay, they're matched pretty well because at least they're in the same profession or whatever. But he's a big jerk. I mean, a huge jerk. You just can't believe what a jerk this guy is. He's terrible to waiters. He's terrible to service people. He's terrible to Miranda. I mean, he yells at her all the time. But she's dating him anyway because she likes him to be bossy in the bedroom. So that's why she's putting up with it. And she's also walking around New York City in that hat getup, which is really bizarre. And I don't understand it. But whatever. That could explain some of the terrible fashion choices in And Just Like That as well. They've always kind of been there. This was the famous scene where Carrie's in the park with Miranda and the girls, and she's wearing that Heidi outfit. And I just thought I'd grab that because they did talk about that so much in the And Just Like That documentary. You don't really see much of this dress. You really just see the top part. If there were full shot of this outfit, I didn't see it while I was watching it back, but I wasn't really paying attention to Carrie. But anyway, I just thought I'd point that out because that was they made such a big deal out of it. But this hat situation over the hood is really inexplicable. So she's telling them how much she thinks he'll calm down eventually. Then they go out to dinner and he's there and he screams at the waitress. She's with all of her friends. He screams at the waitress to get him a beer. And when she brings it, it spills some on the table. And Miranda starts like, this is like sleeping with the enemy. She starts frantically cleaning it up so that he won't see it. And they're like, why are you doing that? And she's like, oh, I just don't want him to go off. So this guy is like abusive. And she's acting like an abused person, trying to make sure that he doesn't fly off the handle. Like, why is she putting up with this? She's out with this guy like all the time. And she keeps saying things like, oh, when he gets his promotion, he'll calm down. Like, you never had to worry about this with Steve, Miranda. Steve never yelled at you or anyone in public, and he never did this kind of stuff. So finally she sees it, because he's never going to be happy. He's just a dick. So she stands up and tells him, never ever call me again. Never. And gets out of that. So good, because sick of that. Then, how many men is she going to make her way through before we get back to Steve? Are we on number 4 now? I don't know how much time has supposedly passed, but she's churning through these men like nothing. So she meets another one in the gym with his bratty little kid who seriously needs to be told no, and have it be meant. Seriously, people, one of the major problems with kids today is that nobody tells them no. And this is a classic example. This kid is just a little he's just a little jerk. Somebody needs to tell him no. So anyway, he's pushing all the buttons in the elevator. No one would let their kid do that when there's other people there. And this guy hits on her in front of his kid, which is weird. See Diego Knows at his episode review of this one, because it's funny. And because he's got a kid and he's like, I would never do this. And he's right. Like, people don't do this. And then when they go on their first date, like, he brings the kid again. Like, on a first date, you're bringing your kid around some girl you don't even know? What kind of parenting is this? It's terrible. She should have broken up with him right then. Said, oh, no, this is not for me. I shouldn't be around your kid. Like, what if we don't go out again? You don't introduce your kid, your 5-year-old or whatever, to random women that you meet in elevators. Like, you don't do that. So they're at the park, and again, this kid is the worst kid ever. He gives Miranda something that's alive, and then he hits her on the head with a stick because, that's normal. And his dad doesn't do anything about it. This guy does not even take the stick away. And he doesn't say, don't hit people with stick. Like, you should never do that again. Like, nothing. He doesn't discipline this kid at all, which just makes me freak out. So then again, okay, so now Miranda's back with this guy. And of course, she slept over there. And his kid is there. Like, they've only been out on 1 or maybe 2 dates. And she's already over at his house. Like, this whole thing is so cringe. I have a frog in my throat. Sorry. This whole thing is so cringe. And again, it's the toilet scene. So here's what I realized when I was watching this back. They actually did a thing where they went back and just like that, recreated this scene with Charlotte and Harry and Lily. It's almost the exact same scene, except that the two aren't in the bathroom together. In this one, it's just Miranda on the toilet in a compromising position. And the kid tries to walk in, and Miranda slams the door on him and hits him in the head, just like Charlotte did to Lily in And Just Like That. So then, of course, this guy is like, oh, you hurt my precious son, who is totally rude and doesn't knock. And I'm a bad parent because I let girlfriends sleep over at my house while my kid's here. But you're the bad one and you have to leave. So he kicks Miranda out. Then, okay, so I wrote a note here because here was a moment where she's with Carrie and she had bought some new sheets and changing her sheets and talking about guys and whatever. And Miranda makes this classic Miranda observation because Carrie is she's obsessing about some guy. And Miranda says, a guy doesn't call you for 3 days and you're ugly? Get a grip. Because Carrie's like, maybe I'm ugly. He hasn't called. I must be ugly. And Miranda's like, get a grip. It's only been 3 days. Is this the same woman who freaked out and wanted to know what was the shelf life on a text message from Che. Remember that? Like, where did this Miranda go? The one who's like, calm down. Like, 3 days. Get a grip. I missed that, Miranda, by the way. I just wanted to throw that in there. So then she's out with Carrie and they're buying flowers and she sees Steve on the street and she hasn't seen him since he broke up with her. And she panics and she does this weird thing where she makes Carrie steal the flowers. This poor guy, he's like, give me my money. And they run away. And of course, they made eye contact. So Steve saw them. And he comes over to her house. He's like, why did you do that? You really hurt my feelings. Again, Miranda, dick move. And she just has a breakdown. I actually think in this episode, this is one of the best acting jobs that Cynthia Nixon did. This is a great scene where she really breaks down and finally is honest about how she feels. She says, I miss you. I didn't know how to react. I'm a shitty person. Yes, thank you for acknowledging how shitty you are, because you really are. And she says, I always want to tell you things. When I hear something funny, I wish I could tell you. And he says, well, why can't you? Can't we still be friends? And he says, what are you doing on Friday? I'll take you out. And she starts crying. She's like, I have a date. And he says the funniest thing. He goes, oh, looking forward to it, are you? Because she's like crying. So they make plans to go out to eat. And I feel like the entire audience is heaving a sigh of relief because finally this Steve is back. Because all those other guys that she was going out with are just were horrors, like freak shows. And we all missed Steve a lot. So I really liked this scene. And I think this is the end of season 2. And so in the end of season 2, they go out to dinner and they end up getting back together after dinner. And they don't know what they're doing. They're kind of not labeling it. They're like, we're just friends who go out, friends who kiss, friends, All right. So I decided to stop. This is the end of season 2. I took a couple of screenshots of this because I really miss this Carrie. I miss wild curly Carrie. And I don't understand why they did what they did to her and just like that. But I took a couple of pictures to remind everyone of the Carrie we all knew and loved. This was such a great episode where she's saying goodbye to Big after he decides that he's going to marry Natasha. This is his engagement party. And it's very, nostalgic. And this is where she says, your girl is lovely, Hubble. And he's like, I don't get it. She goes, you never did. I loved that episode. I thought it was really good. And the wild, crazy hair was perfect. And I just loved it. So season 3, we get back to Miranda and Steve. Miranda is at the doctor's office. She's going to have laser eye surgery to correct her vision. She's very excited about this. She's kind of a science nerd. And so she gets very excited about it. And she tells Steve how exciting it's going to be. They like cut your eyes and they flip open and he's getting all grossed out. That's a really funny conversation, actually. And he says, because he's so thoughtful, let me come with you. Let me help you during that. You're going to be sedated. You're going to need help. And again, Miranda is a big bitch. She's like, no, I don't want to be rescued. I don't need help. I'm going to ask Carrie. And he says, why would you ask Carrie when I'm standing here asking you if I can help? And, he's kind of questioning, like, what are we doing? And she says, well, we haven't quite established that yet. And then she says, well, are you coming up? And he says, well, we haven't quite established that yet, which I thought was funny. But yeah, she chooses Carrie over him, which is crazy. And then classic Carrie move. Classic Carrie's a jerk and not a good friend. Carrie cancels on Miranda on the day of her surgery. And instead of being there for her friend, because she says she has a deadline she has to meet. She can't just bring a notepad to the doctor's office and write it out by hand. No, she has to cancel. And then she does this. She calls Steve and tells Steve that he should go be with Miranda because she can't. Kind of like when she called Aiden to go pick up Miranda from the bathroom floor. Like Miranda calls Carrie for something and Carrie calls somebody else. Classic Carrie move, just, terrible. Carrie's a jerk. So anyway, instead of Carrie doesn't tell Miranda that she called Steve. So Miranda thinks she's on her own. She's actually leaving signs for herself with numbers to call in big letters so that she can get her Shanghai takeout, her Shanghai garden takeout. It's just funny and stupid. But of course, Steve shows up after her. And this is all a very funny scene because she's high on drugs. And she's telling him, don't ever mention these goggles ever again to anyone. And she's not happy to see him either. She's being a jerk. Like, where's Carrie? And he's there helping her. And she's all, I don't want to be helped. No rescue, no rescue. As he's trying to get her into bed, she's kicking him. I mean, I don't know why he likes her. She's just awful. Could you say thank you once in a while, Miranda? It wouldn't kill you. So, of course, Steve stays over with her. She sees him through the fuzzy goggles in the morning. And then she takes the goggles off. And the voiceover says, and Miranda finally saw clearly for the first time in her life. She saw things clearly, which you assume means she saw that Steve is always there for her, that he loves her, and that he's the one she should be with. That's what you get out of the scene. But then, in like the next episode, Steve's and Miranda are out, and he says, I want to be exclusive with you. I want to give this another shot. I want it to be a real relationship. And she all of a sudden turns off. She's completely back to, well, I haven't thought about it that way. And I don't want to let Steve win by default. That's what the voiceover is saying, that she didn't want to let Steve win by default. It's with Miranda, it's always, is there somebody better? Can I do better? I don't know what she thinks is out there. She is fast approaching her decline. She's like 34 in this episode. You are not getting any younger. You already have a lazy ovary. And like, you think there's somebody better than Steve? You went through 4 guys the last time you broke up who were all total assholes. But no, this is her problem. She doesn't know if she can commit to him. And I really don't understand it. I just don't get it. And I wish that Steve would have seen at this moment that like he doesn't need her. So she's talking to Carrie, and she actually tells Carrie, what if there's somebody better? What if somebody better comes along? Which is just awful. And then Carrie tells her to do the thing that Miranda's best at. She says, you're judgmental. Put it to good use. Make a list. Do your pros and cons. That's where the pros and cons come from. So now she's out to a party with Steve, and he's embarrassing her with dumb jokes. So she's making the list with Carrie. Dumb jokes, con. Cute butt, pro. And I just had to put this in here because Samantha, they're at a political party. Samantha just after they tell the thing about dumb jokes, Samantha makes the dumb joke that's also very funny. I don't believe in the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. I just believe in parties. Classic Sam. Love her. So then again, so Miranda is so wishy-washy. She's back and forth and back and forth. So the whole episode, she's been, I don't know, maybe there's somebody else. Maybe he's not the right one. There could be somebody better. And that night, he tells her that she's the best woman he's ever met, which makes me feel very sorry for Steve. And that he loves her. And she doesn't tell him that she loves him back. She counts it in the pros column. I mean, really analyzing this just makes me not like her very much. So then Magda becomes more of a character. And it was the whole episode where she's cleaning out her goodie drawer, and all that. And Miranda keeps comparing her to her mother and saying, I didn't want to hire my mother. And I just like that Magda becomes like more of a part of the show. And she starts questioning Miranda. She starts poking holes in Miranda's theories. And by the end of this episode, she asks her, you like this boyfriend of yours? And she's talking about Steve. And Miranda says, yes. So, well, do you want to marry him? And Miranda, again, I don't know. I just don't know. And she's just struggling with that so hard. And Steve never did struggle. He always just wanted Miranda. And so that's part 2. I'll come back to do part 3 when I get the time. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. And also, what are your thoughts? I'm starting to think that Miranda never deserved Steve. And that Steve made a very poor choice. because looking back at their dating life, the only one I really love here is Steve. Justice for Steve. All right, everybody, take care.